Hey guys, my name is Wren, and I'm bad at art. The video that I have for you today is going to be a mostly real-time sketching video, portrait walkthrough, much like the first video that I posted here on my channel, but it will be, obviously, in a more visible angle, and it will be, for the most part, real-time. This first part here is going to be not real time, and that's because this is just the drawing step. While I did mention that drawing is one of my biggest things that I would like to improve at and work on, I draw really lightly, and that's because most of this ends up being erased or drawn over later on, and this is just here to document for me, for rendering later, what needs to end up going where. It's not very visible because of how light the pencil lines are, and for that reason I do just have it sped up. When I do the drawing portion, what I really like to make sure that I have lined up correctly are the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and the ear. I also like to get a general shape for what the face should look like, and that's pretty important because I've stopped using circles to show what my heads need to look like. This allows for my art to have a much more organic feel to it and a much less created feel. I want my portraits to look like people, and I don't want my portraits to look like they're drawn from an algorithm. And that's a lot of what happens to me in my art when I end up using things like circles for guidelines. And so doing it this way, it looks more organic, it looks more real, it looks more natural, and those are all things that I'm going for in my current portrait study process. After the drawing step, the first thing that I go into is drawing the eyes. This is because eyes are the easiest thing for me to draw. They make sense to me in my head, the way that they look, the way that they are when they turn and when they look straight forwards. It also helps me figure out where the whole layout of the face needs to go. Everything, for me, is relative to where the eyes are. Which is really interesting because you can see actually that for both eyes in this piece, I end up drawing them the wrong shape initially. And a lot of that is because when I use references to draw, I look up at the reference and I'm like, okay, so this is where the eye needs to be. And I make a mark and I know where it needs to be and I know what it needs to look like. But then I just kind of fill in the blanks. Instead of utilizing my references to their full potential by examining what I'm seeing and drawing it exactly that way, sometimes I'm like, okay, so this is what the face looks like, and this is what I think an eye looks like. And I put it on the paper without really realizing why I did that. So a big portion of what I've been trying to use my drawing step for has been making sure that I don't do that. As you can see here, what I'm doing is not actually drawing the nose. What I'm doing is blocking out the shadow on the top of the nose. And that's how I've been trying to draw a majority of the shapes of my portrait pieces. I've found that by breaking them down using tone values instead of using lines actually helps them look much more realistic. The reason for this is because there's actually no lines on your face at all. Nowhere on your face can you point to and be like, ah yes, and here is the line of my nose. Because it doesn't exist. Three-dimensional shapes are not made up of lines, they're made of planes, they're made of shadows and highlights, and by drawing them as such, it actually helps to make them look much more realistic. You can also see right here that I misplaced that nostril quite a bit. And the reason for that is because my guideline that I did in the drawing phase actually didn't include nostrils at all. And I'm glad that I was able to catch that and fix it, because that was super wrong. I imagine at some point I would like to make my drawing step even more in-depth than it is now, but I went for so long not drawing at all that I'm pretty content with where I am currently in the amount of drawing that I do. The reason that I don't draw is actually because I was never adequately explained to in art classes that I took in school why drawing was important. All of my teachers always told me, oh, before you start your actual piece, before you start your project, you have to do 3 thumbnail sketches, and I'm gonna check that you did your 3 thumbnail sketches. And I kind of just felt like it was the same busy work that you get in like a math class or an English class, where they just kind of hand you a worksheet and they're like, okay, this will take up your time. And to me, I felt like it was a much better use and a much more effective use of my time to just go and use all of my time on the final piece. Why would I spend time wasting it on something that no one else is gonna see? And my teachers never explained that the drawing step actually helps you put everything in the right place. And because of that, it is really, really important and really invaluable. What I would do before is I would just jump directly into it, and I would put on the piece of paper an eye, and I would put so much detail into this eye, and I would love it. And I would add everything else around it and realize that it was the only thing that was misplaced on the whole drawing. I'm sure that it wasn't. I'm sure I'm exaggerating. But when you look at it, the only thing that you can see is your beautifully rendered eye is not on the face the way it should be. And using the drawing step to make sure that you're lining up things the way that they should look and putting them on the right place in the face. Using the drawing step to do that allows your rendering to be done in the right place the first time. Speaking of going in and rendering things right away, I actually ended up erasing the guidelines that I had drawn for the mouth originally. They were in the right place, and it helped me line up the rest of the face with where the mouth was supposed to be, but the face was actually tilted a little bit more than the guidelines for the lips originally were. So while I had the edges of the mouth in the right place, it needed to be facing a little bit more to the left of the page. However, when I went back in, you can see right now that the lines that I used on the lips are actually really dark compared to the rest of the lines on the paper right now. And that's because I fell back into old habits here. What I did was I went in and I just immediately rendered the mouth. And that's okay, because it actually ended up working out perfectly fine in this piece. But it is important for me, for myself, to call myself out. I did do something here that I was trying really hard not to, and I did it anyways. You can also see I do flip back into drawing mode a little bit. Working over on this ear, part of my lines start out drawing, and then once I've got the gist of where I want things to be, I think it's about right here, I do flip into rendering after that. What I'm doing is I'm blocking out big areas where shadows are supposed to be. I'm lumping tones together and leaving hollow areas because I am preparing myself to switch from drawing with pencil and doing completed drawings in pencil over to using watercolor. And so by leaving an outlined area that's mostly empty, I'm allowing myself to transition the sketch before shading into being able to just throw watercolor right on top of it. If you use too much graphite, from what I can tell, not great with watercolor paints, but from what I can tell, putting too much graphite on your paper before you go in with your watercolor, not only obviously is your pencil going to be very visible, it can sometimes smudge around with the paint, depending on the quality of the paint you're using and the type of pencil you used and the type of paper. I mean, obviously it's very subjective to the materials that you use, but I'm trying to make sure that I don't have graphite smeared all over my page when I switch to watercolor. I also go over towards the other side of the face from where the ear is, and I'm blocking in some more shades on that side. The other reason that I've been doing just these big open spaces where I know shading needs to be put is by lumping all of the shading into one section. What I'm actually doing is I'm not allowing myself to look at the face as multiple different things. I did previously have a tendency to draw a nose and render the nose, and then I'd draw the face and I'd render the face, and then I'd draw the hair and I'd render the hair, and what would happen is I would have some decently rendered things, but they didn't fit together. And so by seeing all of these tone values and just grouping them together, like, oh, this whole shadow on the left side of the face is all one tone, I'm just gonna lump that together. It's making me look at the face as a face. I've noticed for myself, it actually does do a lot of good in my pieces. It helps me not have such a Frankensteined together art piece. It looks much more cohesive, it looks much more fluent. After I do some tone blocking, I do go in and render the hair a little bit more. I did very, very bare bones in my drawing step for what I wanted the hair to look like, and that's actually because I am pretty bad at drawing hair, and that's okay. I'll work on it later. I do want to do a video later on where I just do a bunch of studies of hair. Hair has always been very difficult for me. I myself have curly hair. And the thing about curly hair is that you can't just draw big cartoonish squiggles and call that good unless that's your whole style. And I personally don't actually have an art style yet. It's a thing that I'd really like to have, but I think for the most part, I'm not ready to develop any level of style. All I can do right now is keep practicing and doing studies. But because of that, I have to be able to draw hair realistically. And when the only reference that you have as a child for how to draw hair is that your hair is curly and it just spirals, it doesn't end up looking good. And because of that, hair has always been super, super daunting. It seemed like such an unaccomplishable feat. So, while I would like to eventually do some studies, practice at it, get better, right now I know that it's not a strong suit of mine, and I have decided that in doing my tone practice, this will be a good time for me to really experiment with how darker tones push things back and lighter tones pull things forwards. Because of that, I do leave the hair really, really plain. I go in, and at the end, it's really, really plain. It's just one big dark area, and I am okay with that. Here is actually where I do start on the shading. I have sped this portion up, and the reason for that is that I love hatching. I love hatching very, very much. I know that I said that already. I think I've said that in both of my videos that I've already got up, but I love hatching. The only thing about hatching is that it is really, really repetitive and really boring to watch. I feel like it is one of the easier methods of shading, And it's super, super therapeutic. But it's repetitive, it's rather boring to watch, and I figured that no one wanted to watch 30 minutes of me hatching, so I just sped this portion up. It does, however, since it is sped up, give you a better idea of where I build the tones that I do build. And I honestly don't think that I build enough tone in this piece. I'm trying, I'm practicing, and that's really good. I am proud of myself for my improvement here, but I don't push tone as much as I could. You can see here where I'm shading on the front section of her chest, there is a line that goes through it, and the reason for that is actually that the top section, as you see here, I'm actually darkening that a bit more. And when I was laying out where my tones and my values needed to go, I knew that the top portion needed to be darker, and drawing that line there just makes it way easier for me to, once I get through the drawing steps, actually go in and do the rendering for value. I have been working very, very diligently to keep all of my steps separate, which means drawing in one step, rendering in a second step, and then finishing rendering, so shading, in the last step. And by keeping all of these portions separated better, I'm able to keep myself in the mindset of it, but it does mean that I have to set myself up for success pretty early on. You can see here that I have some variance in tones. From what I can see, I've got 4 pretty clear-cut tones. I've got the white of the paper, a light gray, a dark gray, and what I'm going to call black, which really is just kind of a dark gray as well. You can see that on the front of the throat, underneath the ear, and the back of the neck. I actually did not follow my reference to a T on all of the shading and where the values are, and that's because there was some shadows that I felt were just too harsh to transfer from the picture onto the paper. The thing about photography is that because you're taking a picture and it's a real life image of a real life thing, sometimes when shadows are not in the most optimal place, or when there are objects that are interacting in a way that are also not the most optimal way, it's not the biggest deal because it is a real thing. No one is creating this, so when there's imperfect things, when there's imperfections, it's not too big of a deal. But when you're taking something and you're putting it onto paper, you do have full control. You have full control of your lighting, you have full control of your object placements, so you can make sure you don't have any tangent lines. You have full control of how much value goes where and how much focus goes on what. You have the whole world at your fingertips. And I really tried to make sure that I took advantage of that by not putting too much darkness below the face. I know my darkest lines do appear at the throat, under the ear, back of the neck, and I think the mouth. I think the mouth has some of the darkest tones in the piece as well. And I'm okay with that, even though it does draw your eye down, because towards the end you can see that I add enough behind the face that it does push your eye back up. So you kind of read the piece bottom to top, which I think is really interesting. Right here you can see me shading the hair, and this is actually, I think, one of the only places that I cross hatch in this piece. And it tends to be one of the only places that I cross hatch in any of the pieces that I make. The reason for this is that I really want the hair normally to be the darkest part of the piece. Like I said earlier, dark tones push things back and light tones pull things forwards. So by making the hair all one solid, pretty dark piece, I'm able to push it back from the face and make it less of a focal point. It pulls the face further forward, which helps push the shape and the three-dimensionality of the portrait, but it also makes it so that in a piece like this, if I were to add too much more detail to the hair, all I would be doing is taking away attention from the face. Obviously, eventually, I do want to get to a point where I can add some really, really lovely details to the hair and make it more a central part of the pictures that I'm drawing, but for right now, I'm just not there yet, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with taking some shortcuts and learning how to do things in a way that's benefiting me right now. Obviously, I will work on that. I want to work on it, and I plan on working on it. But as of right now, I haven't, and that's okay. Right now, I'm just going back in, darkening the eyebrows back up to make sure that they have the same value that the hair does. That helps to link the piece together, and it also adds just a little bit more contrast and a little bit more interest to the face. But as you can see right now, I haven't touched the lips at all. I actually stopped recording and looked at my piece, and I was like, wow, something is wrong here. And I was like, oh, so I picked my camera back up, set everything up the way it was supposed to be, went on to record again. Actually really interesting though, I keep forgetting to shade the lips. For whatever reason, in my head, lips are not a thing that get shading, but only during my shading step. Because I use the value of lips to draw them. They're really difficult for me to draw actually, and I would like to do mouth studies later on too, so hopefully I can hold myself to all of these things I'm committing myself to in this video. But the shape of the lips is something that I really feel out by looking at the values on the lips, so it's crazy to me that I keep just forgetting to shade them at all. This last portion here I decided to add in because I thought I needed something to just push the contrast and push the eye back up even further, like I said earlier. Kind of teased this a little bit. I end up using this next marker here, this one right here. It's a warm gray color. It's warm gray 1 of the Firefly alcohol markers. I actually don't know if you can buy these anywhere. My mother got them for me for Solstice this year, and I don't actually know where you can buy these markers. They were being sold at a store near where I live called Tuesday Morning, and I don't know how local it is. I don't know how many there are. I actually only know where one location of the store is. It is a pretty neat store. It's kind of like Target meets the dollar store. They've got everything, and it's fantastic. But they had these alcohol markers for relatively cheap, and I ended up getting them for a solstice gift. But they are just pretty basic alcohol markers. They're not comparable to Copics or anything, and I'm not planning on making a alcohol comparison marker video. I don't have any intentions of doing that. But I like them because they don't tear up my sketchbook. After using this marker to add in a couple freckles and a couple moles, not all of which are actually in the reference photo that I used. I did make some of them up. I just wanted a little bit of a pop of color. I just sort of add this swash around the head, like I said, to just draw a little bit more attention, pull the eye up from the throat area where it does have a lot of those darkest tones. Overall, I am really content with how this piece turned out, so I'm pretty happy. Thanks for coming, hanging out with me, watching my video. I had a really great time. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.